Hi, friends. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and the topic for tonight is Dump the Incumbents Revisited. Now, Dump the Incumbents was a series of programs uh, that we ran beginning in November of last year, and that ran in a way roughly right up to the present. But what it was about, or what it is about, because in another form it still exists, is about getting rid of big money, okay, in politics, on the assumption that the big money, when given to candidates, is ultimately corrupting to almost all of them, except for the few saint-like candidates. And you can't build a system on the backs of saint-like candidates. You have to build a system on the backs of human beings. Hello, Kay. How are you? Please do share, okay, and like. And I'm sure by now you've subscribed because pretty clear you are getting the notifications, even though I was kind of late in scheduling this one. Okay, so anyway, the idea of dumping incumbents was to create a litmus test for people to use in order to decide or to guide them in deciding who to vote for, okay, in elections. The primary purpose was, yeah, I did get a nap, Kay. I did get a nap. I'm feeling pretty good now. Thank you. uh, okay, the purpose of it was to give people a guide to voting uh, that would get toxic money out of politics rather quickly. The idea was to change politics quickly, okay, and to have a disruptive effect on the way politics is done now in Washington. So, I'm going to give you a little presentation on that. It's a presentation that's old. I'm also going to give you information about the slide presentation in terms of how things have changed over a year. This is a relatively short slide presentation, about 12 slides or so. We have a much longer one, roughly 33 slides somewhere, uh, that goes into things in a little more depth. But the basic ideas will come out of this presentation that I'm about to give you and that I'm about to comment on. Now, one other preliminary remark is that and the basic idea of this approach to voting in politics is that we believe that most of us by now accept the idea that politics is corrupt and that because it's corrupt, it's guided, controlled, okay, it's manipulated to their advantage by the donors, the means the donors use to corrupt things in politics, to corrupt individuals, and to corrupt the political parties is, of course, the big money that they give to candidates, that they give to the parties, that they give to the interest groups. And it's because of the big money that, generally speaking, the public mostly doesn't get any policies that it wants unless some of the people who give the big money are in favor of those particular policies. Of course, the most exemplary idea about this here is that for years and years and years, it's been the case that two-thirds of the voters are for Medicare for all. For many years, for decades, basically. And yet, Medicare for all never gets to the floor of the houses of Congress for a vote. Why doesn't it get to the floor? Because the Congress people know that if it gets to the floor, it'll be very embarrassing for them because they will have to defeat it and come out in the open and admit they're against Medicare for all. Admit that they're opposed. Hi, Dee, how are you? They will have to admit that they are opposed to Medicare for all. So it's introduced into each Congress. It never gets to the floor. It's pigeonholed in committee. And they never have to vote on it. And we, the public, never get to support it because it never comes up for a vote. And of course, it never passes. And year after year, we have a broken medical care system here in the United States. We spend by far the most in the world compared to our population. We spend, well, compared to our GDP anyway, we spend now close to 20% of our GDP on medical care, on the combination of medical care and medical insurance. That is astronomical to most other countries. There are one or two countries that spend 13% of GDP or 12% of GDP, but the average of OECD countries is roughly 10% of GDP. So the point is, we could get good medical care at half the price. I also have to emphasize, of course, that the medical care we get is substandard. Our life expectancy has been going down, down, down. It is the lowest of all the OECD countries. There are many countries that are not OECD countries and have been getting medical care, better medical care than ourselves. And it's easy to point out one of those is Cuba, who now has a life expectancy that's greater than the United States. They have a GDP which is minuscule. They spend a minuscule amount on medical care compared to what we spend as a percent of GDP. The whole situation is ridiculous. We are not getting value for our dollar or for the government's dollar, better said, in terms of what we pay for our health care. There are lots of other policies that are favored by a majority of the population, a majority of the voters, and they never pass either. Major problems in Congress are never solved because there are certain solutions that are wanted by the voters, and the donors don't want those particular solutions. So the donors basically control our political system. They do because they control the flow of money in the political system to the candidates and the flow of money in the political system to the media. And it's terrible. Everybody knows our democracy is gone. We have something close to an oligarchy. It's a system that has been called by Sheldon Wallen an inverted totalitarian system. I'm not going to go through exactly what that means by now because I want to get to the presentation and I've covered it in other live streams. But here we are. Here's a relatively short slide presentation. Okay, that's the wrong one. Let me get to another one. This is it. It's called Dump the Incumbents Open Talk. When I presented it at first, it was in a format where people could come into the live streams and express their views. I'm not going to do that here tonight because our time is limited. But anyway, here we go. So notice we called this effort the Dump the Incumbents Project. That has now been changed. We started with Dump the Incumbents because it was very catchy. It made a hashtag that was very good, which was actually Lana Dell made the suggestion that we use the Dump the Incumbents hashtag. It has a certain power because even though people overwhelmingly vote for the incumbents, there's a great deal of resentment and anger against them also. So we named the whole project the Dump the Incumbents Project. We've changed that now. We've changed it to Dump the Corruption because there are a lot of times that we would rather vote for an incumbent than a challenger who's even more bought by the interests, who has raised more big money than the incumbents have raised. There are now incumbents who don't take any of the big money. They only take small donations. There are not too many of them, but they are unbought, and we hope that group is going to grow. So we generalize the idea to dump the corruption. We want people to apply it to the incumbents and to their challengers, okay, as well. So here are some basic questions. Would dumping the corruption send a clear message? Would it shock and disrupt the Congress? Would it bring bottom-up change? Would it give third parties a chance? Would it make things worse than they are now? The final question is it electoralism? We'll go into what that is, and then we'll answer that question. On to the next slide. This is the basic rule. Vote against every incumbent except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, from individuals, or from PACs. We have expanded that idea since we introduced it. Now we vote against every candidate except those who will not take money from wealthy corps, from individuals, from PACs, from party committees, okay, or who don't receive any support from super PACs. Because, of course, the candidates aren't allowed to take money from the super PACs. The super PACs operate independently, supposedly. They're not allowed to formally coordinate with the campaigns, But super PACs are now increasingly spending huge amounts of money on behalf of candidates without explicitly coordinating with the candidates. For example, the American Israel Political Action Committee, the APAC, and also its associated super PAC, which is known as the UDP, have been trying to defeat Summer Lee, a congressional candidate from Pennsylvania. They spent a fortune in the primary against her. She beat their candidate in that particular primary. But now, here in the closing stages of the general election, they've decided it's worth investing money again in the final days of the campaign, and they're throwing $1 million at the campaign to try to defeat her again. Okay, in the general. They made an assessment. They decided to throw another $1 million away. It's easy for them to do that because they raised their money from extremely wealthy billionaires. Pretty sure one of them is Sheldon Adelson, for example. And the expression, they have more money than God, applies to them. And they're applying that money to defeat Summer Lee. And they're not the only super PACs out there that they're expending excessive amounts of money to defeat people who are progressive. Okay. Those efforts would always fail, almost always fail, if this rule were applied, this rule as expanded to party committees, okay, to corporations, of course, okay, and to super PACs. Okay, so this rule is the litmus test. Now, what happens if you get basically an incumbent who takes a lot of the big money, and you get a challenger who takes a lot of the big money? Well, then the one you vote against is the person who takes or gets the most big money. It's as simple as that. Okay. In cases where you can reasonably vote against both of the candidates who are taking big money, notice, let's say it's a primary contest, and you've got a Bernie Sanders in there who isn't taking any big money, and you have two other candidates running against him who are taking big money, then the rule that would apply is you vote against every candidate except those who won't take any of the big money from wealthy corps or individuals or PACs. Now, first question. Would it send a clear message? For example, if 50% of the Senate incumbents running would be to be defeated, that would be a wake-up call for 2024. In other words, if 50% of the Senate incumbents running this year in 2022 were to be defeated, that would be a wake-up call for 2024. I believe there are 34 senators who are running this year. Okay. If 50% of them were to be defeated, that would certainly be a wake-up call for those running for the Senate in 2024. If they were to be defeated and everybody knew they were defeated because they took the big money, that would send a clear message that big donor money is toxic for one's campaign because it is becoming increasingly unacceptable to the public, and the public is determined to drive it out of the campaigns, it being the big money. And it would be clear that the public has also concluded that the only way to drive the big money out of the campaigns is to defeat the candidates who are taking the big money. The same message would be sent at all levels of government. When the new group of incumbents took office in 2023, in other words, the victors in the 2022 campaign, all would be on notice that oligarchy in Congress was ending. Many of the old guard committee chairs would have been defeated. The new House leadership would be in charge. Now, of course, that is unlikely now, as we see from the polls, because people have not organized and have not focused on this rule for voting. I presented it on various occasions. It's evidently hard for people to take it up. They get lost in the politics of it. They get lost in the claims about the qualities of the different candidates. They will not use the rule. We have to organize. We have to organize a campaign to get them to use the rule and drive the big money out of politics. Because if they don't do that, the end result will be we will never get the policies we need out of the Congress. If during this election we have a situation where this rule was used, then many of the old guard committee chairs would have been defeated. For example, Richie Neal would have been defeated. He's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, by the way. Also, by the way, Nancy Pelosi would have already been defeated by Shahed Buttar or somebody else. And she would not be a candidate for Congress this year as she is. She would already have been defeated if this rule had been used. Most of the new senators would be for getting rid of the filibuster, and it's likely a shocked Senate would end it on the first day. On the first day of the new congressional session on January 3rd of 2023. Here's a little slide about how toxic the big donor money is. You see this graphic. This graphic was done by Jimmy Sunderland. It's very expressive, of course, of the poisonous character of the big donor money and of the deadly, fatal nature of the big donor money. It's not yet fatal to people who take the big donor money. We hope to make it fatal to the careers of those who take it. But right now, the big money is only toxic to the people of the United States, which is why we have to get it out of politics. Would it shock, that is using a litmus test, operating according to dump the corruption, would it shock and disrupt the Congress? Compared to other methods of getting change, this one, strengthened and fueled by an array of continuous policy-oriented direct actions of other kinds, along with general strikes, promised to be much quicker than other methods of seeking change. And quick is what we need, since we probably have only 2 or 3 years to get on top of the climate emergency. And of course, we need hashtag M4A, that is Medicare for All. Yesterday, dumping the incumbents, in this case, dumping the corruption, or dumping the corrupt incumbents, in very large numbers, is what we need to do to shock and disrupt the legislative systems and change them across the nation. This method is not about the individuals in the Congress. I'm sorry, I'm addressing here, would it bring bottom-up change? This method is not about the individuals in the Congress. It is about changing that system, changing it quickly, changing its rules and structures and its way of doing business by getting new people in it who will want to democratize the Congress and who won't be corrupted by big money, because we would not vote for them if they were getting big money. By this we mean creating rules and structures that will greatly increase the influence of backbenchers and newbies who want to introduce new legislation and get floor votes for their legislation. There will be many more floor votes than now. If we dump the corruption as a litmus test, there will be many more floor votes than now, many more bills, and far less controlled by committee chairs and leadership teams. That, my friends, will bring bottom up change. Would it give third parties a chance? Polling shows that many Americans are unhappy with the two-party system. Ranked choice voting is becoming more popular to change that situation. But hashtag dump the incumbents, soon to be changed to dump the corruption, will open up opportunities for third-party candidates in 2022. Well, this would have been the case if we gained any momentum, at all. But we have not. Voters who are left of center, for voters who are left of center, a Democratic incumbent who has won a primary means they will have a difficult choice in the general uh, uh, election. Those voters are more likely to vote third party if they want to both vote their consciences and also stick with dump the incumbents. Oh, I should say something about that. There are many people who want to give third parties a chance. For example, Brianna Joy Gray has said she's done voting for major parties. She's only going to vote for third parties from now on, and I believe she said most probably the Green Party. Okay. So, uh, it's fine to say that. It's good to say that. It's good also to vote for third parties. But the question is, how are you going to get people to vote for the third parties, to give the third parties a chance? Under the present system, the third parties don't get any attention. They don't get carried by the media. They don't appear in the debates. They are lost. There's a complete focus on the two major parties. So the question is, how can Brianna Joy Gray, how can she vote for a party that has a chance to win? Or in other words, how can third parties have a chance to win? Well, you don't give them a chance to win by saying, hey, vote for third parties, vote for the Green Party because they're for this and they're for that and they're for the other thing and they're for this thing. That's the conventional method of getting people to support a candidate. However, if you go at this by using the dump the incumbents method or the dump the corruption method, that guides you towards voting for the candidates who have taken the least amount of big money. In most cases, it will turn out that those candidates are third-party candidates. So, specifically a message for Brianna Joy Gray: if you want people to vote for a third party, if you want people to vote for the Green Party, get people using the litmus test to get rid of big money in politics, because that is going to lead them to third parties. I mentioned Brianna Joy Gray because on quite a number of occasions right now, she's brought up her frustration about the main parties and how the donors have control and that voters can never get what they want because they can never vote for people they want to vote for. But beyond that, she doesn't know what to do about it. She doesn't know what to do about it. All she can say is vote for third parties, folks. But they're not going to vote for third parties on her say so. They have to have a reason to vote for third parties. Now, the reason, of course, is that everybody in the two major parties is corrupt. But the question is what to do about the corruptions. This litmus test focuses the attention on candidates who are failing this test and who people should be voting against as a result. And then that leads voters to start paying attention to third parties. It's an indirect way to get them to pay attention, but it's basically saying to them, find another candidate that has not been corrupted by big money. Find that other candidate. The way you find that other candidate is looking at the candidates who are in the race and deciding who to vote against. That will lead you to third parties, and they will get a better chance to win. If they knew everybody was using the litmus test, if that was becoming clear that there was a mass movement to use the litmus test, then people will begin to get confidence that they don't have to vote for one of the two major parties because otherwise their vote will be wasted. They will have confidence that because of the movement, because of the strength of the movement, there will be enough people voting third party that their third party may have a chance to win. So, this is slide 9, which says simply, it won't work because too many will fear making the situation worse. And this fear arises out of specific choices people must make. If you have two major party non-incumbents running in the primary who are taking big money, the rule is vote for the non-incumbent taking the least amount, of big money. That's a way of getting the least amount of corruption involved in your decision about who to vote for. Next, you can have two major party incumbents running in a primary, both taking big money. If a non-incumbent is running who has a remote chance to win, then dump both of the incumbents. Where do you have a situation where you have two major party incumbents? Well, you have it frequently because there's redistricting that comes up. New districts have to be constructed, and often enough, two major party incumbents, both taking big money, are pitted against each other in contests. So the rule there is dump both incumbents if a non-incumbent is running. If no non-incumbent is running, vote for the incumbent taking the least amount of big money. Are there times when you want to break that rule? There may be. For example, certainly Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania is taking big money in his run, if only from himself. He is actually part of the oligarchy. He wants to put himself directly in Congress. Now, I make a mistake here because obviously John Fetterman is not an incumbent in that position, but he is an establishment candidate. He is for certain things that are non-establishment, however, but he can easily be charged with being an establishment candidate, and he has taken some big money in part of his campaign because he's been supported by his family. Okay, and his family got him started in this campaign with some big money. However, the scale of the big money that is available to Oz and the scale of the big money that's available to Fetterman, that's very different in scale. It's clear that in a clear choice between the two, one should vote for Fetterman. But there is another candidate running who's not a major party candidate, who hasn't taken any big money at all, and that person is running in this campaign. Now, generally speaking, that non-incumbent may be the person to vote for. But then practical considerations come in. Does that particular non-incumbent have a chance to win? Well, only a chance to win if everybody religiously applies the rule, okay, as they should do. But if the non-incumbent is not a well-known individual, does not have a name, okay, at all, and cannot beat, let us say a Dr. Oz, then you may want to relax the rule a little and look at Fetterman compared to Oz and take a decision based on the fact that Fetterman takes less big money than Oz, or has less big money at his disposal, or outside money is coming in, the independent expenditures, and a lot more is coming in for Oz rather than Fetterman. And so the litmus test would be, in that case, to vote for Fetterman. How about if you have one major party incumbent and one major party candidate taking big money? Then you vote for a third party candidate not taking big money. So, when a lot of people hear this suggestion or this litmus test, they say, this is electoralism. It's not going to work. And it's true that electoralism has been largely ineffective in the United States because the conditions for its success, for example, mass movements using frequent direct action, strong unions, fair, unrigged elections, much greater levels of equality, and legislatures that legislate for people have been undermined by the power of money in politics. In other words, electoralism doesn't work because of the power of money in politics. So the question is, how do we bring back conditions underpinning electoralism, producing legislation that's going to benefit people through mass movements demanding different forms of justice using a variety of direct actions ranging from minor protests to general strike? How can we bring back those conditions? Because that's what we have to do. We must increasingly disrupt economic systems working only for the wealthy, while aligning with and restoring unions. But also, to make electoralism work, we need to bring mass movements, and direct action to the election climate. Now, dump the incumbents, now known as dump the corruption, is direct action designed to disrupt the flow of money to candidates and its influence over them. But it is not electoralism. It is electoralism disruption. So, dump the corruption is not about pursuing electoralism. It's about disrupting electoralism by getting people to vote against big money in politics, by firing all the legislators who take that money. It's about making that money and its influence over incumbents toxic and candidates. Its influence over incumbents toxic to those incumbents and those candidates who are taking big money. So that money will be driven out of politics by voters to be replaced by the demands of people expressed through mass movements, protest activities, general strikes, unions, alternative media, and people's pressure campaigns on legislators across the board. So it is about creating the primacy of bottom up politics in America and the end of political oligarchy. It is the general strike of voters against money in politics. That's what dump the corruption is. It's the general strike of voters against money in politics. By aiming the strike, that is the litmus test activity towards the candidates who are taking the big money in politics by voting against them, by by using this to manufacture their defeat. So that's it. Okay, I now want to return and have some discussion. We went through that in a timely manner. Okay, everybody greets each other. By the way, thank you for coming. And Jeff Denton leaves an icon that I cannot see. Hello, Jeff. Glad to see you. Steve Volkbrandt says, hello, Jeffrey. Kay says, hi, Jeff. CC Swift says, how about if the candidates are filthy rich like Dinah Hands? How could you convince people to stop voting for the oligarchy, for the oligarchs? The way you convince people is saying the objective here is to get money out of politics in order to get rid of the influence of the oligarchs, because their money is toxic, because when they spend it, it's used to benefit what they want. So if the candidates are already filthy rich like Donnie Tiny Hands and like Dr. Oz, you point out to people, hey, they are the oligarchs. They're not going to vote in your interest. They're not going to do anything for you because they are the oligarchs. So you vote against them. In other words, the litmus test for them is, they never should have bothered to run because they're toxic to begin with. Their money is just as toxic as if they gave it to somebody else. So Kay says, I wasn't crazy about Tim Ryan, but he's getting no money now. Okay, I voted for him, though. Well, Tim Ryan is much, much better than J.D. Vance. When we're talking about some economic issues, like, for example, minimum wage, he's far better, okay, than J.D. Vance. He's not very good on social issues supported by progressives, okay, and many Democrats. But when it comes to economic issues, he's a Democrat. He's certainly not a Republican. He's supportive of Democratic measures to make life better for people from an economic point of view. Okay, it's just that he's not so great when it comes to social issues. So I'm not crazy about Tim Ryan either, but he's been taking the least amount of money, right? And he's certainly better on almost all policy questions that have to do with democracy than J.D. Vance. I mean, J.D. Vance is another member of the oligarchy running. Steve Wolfbrand says, appears to be a last minute surge for Republicans, probably going to take both houses of Congress for sure. Well, that's the prediction right now. We have to see if that holds water. There was also evidence for some time that there were many registrations by poor people and women and blacks, new registrations this year, and early voting by them also. And also that this phenomena wasn't supposedly taken account of by many of the pollsters. So some people are saying the polls are off. Now, people often say the polls are off, and they're not off, but in many recent elections, they have been off because the pollsters have not constructed samples that are representative, okay, of everyone who's voting. In other words, they don't pick up on the idea that the sample has to be changed compared to last time. That appears to be the situation this year. We will find out. There are many analysts who've been claiming that. We will find out if that's really true. If it is really true, then the Democrats will do a lot better than people are expecting them to do. Kay Ryan says the DNCC has decided Ohio isn't worth supporting. I know, I think that's stupid. Stupid. CC Swift says, so vote for the least corporatist, I guess. No, not exactly that. Vote for the person taking the least amount of big money from corporations, from their own wealth, from super PACs, from PACs, and from party committees. So it's not simple advice like vote for the least corporatist candidate. It's vote for the candidate who is taking the least amount of big money and spending the least amount, okay, of big money. And Ghostart says, i.e., a Republican. I guess that's it. Kay says, Nan Whaley is running for governor here too. Wish Ohio would go blue, but I doubt that will happen. Yeah, I know. Ohio at one time, for some time, was a fairly blue state. It had two blue senators. It often had some governors who were blue. It was pretty blue at one time during like the 1960s, 1970s, part of the 1980s. And Steve says, hi, Ghost Star. Kay says, hi, Steve. Steve Wolfbrand says, smash the like button. Thank you, Steve. I always Forget to say, smash the like button. By the way, if you haven't subscribed, please do. So it says, hey, at Steve Wolfbrand, fancy meeting you here. Go Start says at K Ryan. Steve Wolfbrand says, go Start. I'm over here all the time, laugh out loud. Yes, Steve, you've been over here an awful lot of the time lately. I am grateful. Okay, I welcome you. I hope you continue to come all the time. Go Start says, IKR, we are the champions. Kay says, yes, we are. Go Start says, of the world. Laugh out loud. Steve says, what do you think of Nan Whaley's campaign here? I don't know much about it, but I will talk to Ezra about it tomorrow night. I promise I will mention what he thinks of Nan Whaley's campaign in Ohio. Coach, that says, Kay, it's all white noise to me. CC Swift says, okay, thanks for answering my question, trying to sort it all out. It's easy to sort out, follow the rule. Follow the rule. If you try to follow the rule, you'll find that for various reasons, you want to create exceptions to the rule. Maybe this particular candidate who's the incumbent has been good to you. Maybe he or she has been doing good constituent service. Perhaps it's clear to you that that incumbent is certainly superior to the incumbent from the other party from the standpoint of your own values. That's really the trap, because you look at a candidate and you see that candidate's expressing values that are close to your own. You're thinking, that's the good candidate to represent me. But remember, if that candidate is taking the big money, that candidate can easily be corrupted by the interests behind the big money. And in the end, they will not vote in Congress for what you want. They will not represent you. It's the money that's the driving force for most of the candidates. Keeping that money flowing is the driving force for them. So the only way to get rid of the oligarchs and get rid of the influence of the big money is to vote against the people they're giving the big money to. That's it. That's really the question. That's always the question. Now, I have here a congressman who seems like a decent person. She's smart. She appears to be well organized. But she's a lawyer. She seems to be for people, seems to be nice to people. But she is taking the big money. She's a conventional Democrat, an establishment Democrat. And she takes the big money from certain sources, especially party committees. On the big issues, she's obviously corrupt. She's not a supporter of Medicare for all. For her, it's the public option BS. Doesn't press strongly on green issues, though she seems to support them, seems to verbally support them. She doesn't fight for anything, okay, in that particular, that area. So she's a candidate, okay, to vote against, certainly in the primary. But if she gets through the primary and comes into the general, which is where she is now, who is running against her? It's this guy, Hung Kao, who is filling the airspace with stuff about himself And what he's in favor of, he obviously has a huge amount of money coming from the Republican side. He himself is very right wing. I don't know if he's ever expressed direct support for Trump, but he reflects the Trumpist values to the hilt. He's very well educated, has a degree from MIT, so in certain ways he's going to be very competent, but he is very, very right wing. And he doesn't seem to be taking any less big money than Jennifer Wexton is. They're the only two running. It's a clean decision to say, well, this time out, I should be voting for Jennifer Wexton, in spite of the fact that I know that she's going to be disappointing. She's going to be disappointing, but at least she won't be too much in the area of rage inducing, while Hung Kao will be rage inducing. So Steve Wiltbrand says, Caruso has his own money, and I believe he wants to help our city. Well, it would be nice to know what that means. But in general, it's true. Rich people suck. Only billionaire I like, okay, is Elon. Well, okay, Steve, I'd like to ask you why you like Elon. He seems to me to be an insufferable egotist who is unwilling to learn anything from anybody. So, uh, I think I have a problem with him because I think a supreme amount of arrogance generally doesn't make a good congressperson. CC Swift asks, will exit polls be allowed? I'm not sure what you're saying, CC. The exit polls will occur. So, yeah, they're allowed. But how would exit polls affect the situation that we're talking about here? How do exit polls actually affect the decisions that you're going to make in some future election? Kostad says, PSA, U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine, as in weapons inspectors. Oh, so Scott Ritter types, they hired some Scott Ritter types. But I doubt they agree with Scott Ritter, right? Steve Wolfbrand says, go start. That's how we started in Vietnam, with advisors, yes. Go start says, it's our MO. Ghostad says, why the Kerberos separation, Joe? Well, it's just that in the Kerberos situation, I was somewhat constrained about when I could go on. Uh, I felt constrained about uh, how many times, I could go on. I had to worry about scheduling conflicts, okay, with other people. But the main determining factor was I saw other models of people who were being very successful, okay, on the web with the kind of model I'm applying now. I couldn't apply that model within the Kerberos context. I proposed that model, but it was taking so long to implement it in the Kerberos context that I just lost patience. It was a question of losing patience. I wanted to get started making the changes that I wanted to make, And I felt that it would be easier for me to make those changes if I went off on my own. There are some other people um, uh, who have joined me. You don't see them in the streaming context, but uh, there are some others that I'm still with in the sense that we mutually support each other and we'll be working together, okay, in that way. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Kerberos people who stayed. And I think the relations I have with Kerberos at this time, okay, are cordial. I accept all questions from them about, things I was involved in. I do my best to help them in that particular situation. I think Shane Coughlin and I are still friends. We've also agreed that we're going to collaborate in certain contexts. For example, okay, on Medicare for All matters, I see us as occasionally collaborating. Uh, there are also there are group streams we're probably going to collaborate on. We don't have a difference in values when it comes to policy. Uh, this is more just a question, okay, of business and differences over, maybe we'd call it, I don't even know if I want to call it the style, okay, of management, because I don't think that's quite true. It might be true in certain subtle ways, but okay, this is not a situation where this was an angry separation, okay, at all. It was more a situation as well. I have to get started with these changes, and things are not moving fast enough. Uh, okay, so I left and went off on my own, and I'm very glad I did. I feel a lot better about that. I feel a lot less constrained. I feel I can do more. I feel I have been doing more. You see, 3 streams a day now, right? That's 15 streams a week. So that's just by myself. Uh, I expect, okay, Lisa is going to get into a better situation time wise fairly soon, and that she's going to be doing some streams on this panel also, and we'll be doing some comment streams, okay, as well. And then instead of 15 streams a week, we'll be doing more like 20 streams a week. Uh, we'll have the kind of activity level that you see over at the Duran, which is basically what we're aiming for, that kind of activity level. Steve Oprand says John Fetterman supports franking and has trouble speaking. That doesn't sound good. Well, having trouble speaking doesn't really bother me. I believe that's going to be over. He says by January that's going to be over. I think it's probably going to be more like spring or maybe late spring. But uh, he's right. It's a temporary condition. Okay, it is going to be over. He's not going to be having trouble speaking. In terms of the fracking, uh, of course, I hate fracking. But again, you have to look at the choice. Here's Fetterman. He's now come around to Medicare for All since his own experience. He's great also when it comes to abortion rights. He's great on the safety net and Social Security. He's great on unions. He has always supported fracking in the Pennsylvania context. I believe, I may be wrong about this, but I believe that he's soon going to give up supporting fracking, because he's going to come into contact with a lot of people on the Democratic side who are opposed to fracking for very good reasons. So I don't think he's going to be for fracking for long. I might be wrong about that, but that's my feeling. C.C. Swift says, and that rage is what the Reichwingers want: divide, okay, and conquer. I'm not sure what you're referring to there, CC. I'm not sure. Steve Wolfman says, we have city council scandals here. At least Ulysses won. That was a miracle. Yeah, she's supposed to be really great. Kay says Kerberos is too repetitive. CC said, I was asking about the exit polls because the militias might be trying to intimidate the exit pollsters. Sorry, I was off topic. Watching two different streams. Okay, thanks for the question anyway, CC. Steve Philipper says, I love Elon because of SpaceX, his visions of the future. Tesla, he is an eccentric genius. He sleeps on a mattress in his office. Okay. But what kind of societal structure is he for in the end? I mean, I'm glad he's an eccentric genius. That's much more entertaining than someone who's just a genius. The fact that he sleeps on a mattress in his office, I don't know what to think about that. What I'd rather do is turn my house into an office and sleep on a mattress on my bed.
Everybody to their own.
Yes, each to his own. His visions of the future, well, I've been reading science fiction since I was 9 years old. The first science fiction book I read was written by Heinlein, actually, Robert Heinlein. And the second one was by Raymond F. Jones. It was a book called The Alien, the Marzul, the Alien. Now, that was a terrific book. I soon graduated to Asimov's stuff, and I read the original Foundation series and became an Asimov fan for my whole life now. I've lived to see the Foundation series actually come to the screen in a very, very entertaining way. I have some visions of the future too. I'm interested in Elon's visions of the future, but that doesn't mean I like his politics. His politics seems like it's very oligarchic. He seems to be very far from a small d Democrat, but to me. I'm not talking party affiliation. I don't give a damn about his party affiliation. I'm talking about whether he really believes in democracy. His program is empowering democracy. What is it about Elon that empowers democracy. Steve says, I love space travel. SpaceX is exceptional. Well, I love SpaceX too. And I love space travel too, including faster than light space travel. I love all that stuff. However, how does Elon empower democracy? From my point of view, he doesn't. From my point of view, he's just a billionaire like the other billionaires, only out for his own interest. Ghostart says there's an anti-war, anti-imperialist MIT graduate who's running Democrat for governor in Kentucky. He won the primary, so of course the DNC defunded him. Of course, they also have defunded Charlie Booker, haven't they? Who's running for the Senate in Kentucky. I love Charlie Booker, by the way. K. Ron says, you can have him, Steve. And Steve Ghostart says, Starlink is the military-industrial complex worldwide surveillance currently working for the Ukrainians in the Ukraine war. That is not supporting democracy. Steve Wolbrand says, Jimmy is pretty cool. Yes, she certainly is pretty cool. And Dolores Pierce says, I love Jimmy. Ghostart says, Starlink is being used to coordinate the military logistics for Ukraine, and they're taking their talents to Africa. Hashtag no more hands off Africa. Kay says, gotta go, Joe. I love you and all of you. Thank you, Kay. Steve says, bye, Kay. Dolores says, good night, Kay. I hope your formula will help us to be able to stop voting for the lesser of two evils I call right wing, Reich wing. Yes. Yes, I hope so too. I hope we can end the voting for the lesser, of two evils. In terms of that, I want to say with respect to Fetterman, I don't think Fetterman is simply the lesser, of two evils. In other words, Oz is really evil, in my view. He's really one of the worst kinds of people you could vote for. I think that Fetterman is a decent man. I think he has many values and policies in common with the policies and values that we would like to see. I also think for a while he will be subordinate to the power structure. But I also think he is one of the most promising people in terms of helping to end the power structure in the Senate. Was Asimov a Russian? Asimov was a Russian Jew. He was a product of the New York City, was he New York City school system or Boston? I think he was a product of the Boston school system, if I recall, as I recall. He was a prodigy. He was absolutely brilliant, in many fields. He wrote more science books than he did science fiction books. He became a professor, as I recall, at Boston College. He was extremely strong in mathematics, in science. And of course, he was the first to imagine a galactic empire that was populated almost entirely by humans and by robots, of course. C.C. Swift, does out of body travel count for space travel? No, I think it's the other stuff. I read all the old sci fi. Remember how Flash Gordon landed? SpaceX made that real. Yeah, I remember how Flash Gordon landed. Yeah. Yes, I remember Buster Crab as Flash Gordon. Steve says Elon is not a politician. I don't like his view of population control or lack thereof. He has his flaws for sure. CC Swift says, I don't know, Joe. Supporting fracking is pretty evil to our survival. Okay, more so to the planet. I agree. I wouldn't be for Fetterman if I thought he would stick with fracking. I don't believe he's going to stick with fracking. The reason why I don't believe he's going to stick with fracking is because his reason for sticking with fracking was because it was going to create jobs for Pennsylvanians. That's what it was. But he's going to be entering a national environment where MMT is becoming more and more important, in which he will be learning MMT. He'll be learning also the connection of MMT to green politics and creating jobs in the green politics kind of context. And at that point, he will not be a supporter of fracking any longer, because he will realize that the federal job guarantee, okay, at a living wage, uh, which may be applied as well to green jobs, uh, those things will convert him to opposition to fracking. Yes, I understand it's about our survival, but my point is that in supporting fracking, John was no different, okay, from Dr. Oz. Okay, the difference is, but Dr. Oz is not going to change. But I think John Fetterman will. And Dolores Pierce says, thank you, everyone, and good night. And Cece says, oh, okay, it's telling people what they want to hear, but fracking for your gerbs. No, I don't think it was telling people what they want to hear, exactly. Okay, I think that he hasn't thought through the position. Okay, he looked at it from the standpoint of fracking will create more jobs, and that will be good for Pennsylvanians. All I think he has to do is to be exposed to a framework that shows him other ways of creating more jobs for Pennsylvanians. That's all I'm saying. I might be wrong about that, but I think that everything will push him in that particular direction. Okay, folks, I got to go. Okay, I'm a little bit late here. I got to go on to other things. Steve Wolfbrand says, have you ever succeeded in out of body travel? There are a lot of Stanford Research Institute experiments in out of body travel, and some people were said to have succeeded in out of body travel. Anyway, that's all for the present. Good night. I will see you tomorrow with 3 more streams. I will have Ezra coming to the 9 o'clock stream. I'm sure he's going to be at that one because it's going to be the last stream before the elections. And I think he'll want to give us a rundown on the latest there, and also on, we'll want to learn from him how serious he considers the supposed late surge of the Republicans. I have my doubts about that supposed late surge. C.C. Swift had a Kundalini awakening, scared of the out of body stuff. I haven't tried to do the out of body stuff. Anyway, as I said, good night, everybody. Also, before I say good night entirely, thank you, CC. I want to call your attention to my Patreon account. It's patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And my Buy Me a Coffee account, buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. Please visit occasionally. Hey, Russ Gorman, how are you? I did not know that you were here. It's nice to see you. Steve Wolfbrand says we need Ezra. I believe we're going to have Ezra tomorrow with bells on. Thank you, Steve. And good night, everybody. 3 streams again tomorrow. Pretty big concentration on election news tomorrow. And there's going to be more concentration on election news on Friday, okay, as well. I don't know if Ezra will have any extra time on Friday. He may, and I'm going to try to get him back for Friday as well as for Thursday. Anyway, good night, everybody.